Hey guys, I'm Sai and welcome to A.C.E Podcast Nation. This is Series 2 of our revamped and new look mental health in sports series. This time around, this series is focusing specifically on footballers. We'll be talking to current and ex-footballers about their difficulties with mental health, addiction and similar subjects. In the current climate of the world, talking about mental health issues is more important than ever. These shows are going to be an open and honest account of some of the issues faced by these athletes in their own words and how it affected their lives and their loved ones. Here at A.C.E Podcast Nation, we've got many great shows and series featuring expert interviews, top guests, expert analysts and more. You can check out the video versions of all our shows and series at youtube.com/ACE Podcast Nation, and the audio version of every single show is available at your usual podcast and radio platforms, the links to which are all in the description below. You can find us on social media for more information on upcoming shows, series and guests. So first of all, I'd like to introduce my guest. Well, not my guest, he's my co-host for this series. He's going to be joining me for each episode as we talk to different guests. He's a mental health support worker. He's been on the channel and before. Mr. Jacob, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, good. Yeah, really good. Really excited to be on today, and really look forward to the next couple of sessions we're going to be doing together.
Yeah, it's good. So with this series, we're going to basically, we've got 5 current and former footballers. We're going to talk about their struggles, their issues with mental health or addiction. They've all got obviously different stories, different experiences. And it's going to be just a natural conversation of them kind of telling their story, and we're going to jump in here and there and ask questions and discuss certain aspects of whether it be mental health or addiction. But first of all, for the people who maybe haven't seen your previous appearances on the channel, what is it that you do?
So in my sort of day-to-day work, I work for a community mental health team, NHS team. So I will see people, sort of my day-to-day work will be see people who are struggling with their mental health in the community. So I'll help them with, it could just be their mental health, it could be housing stuff, could be benefit stuff, could be education. A lot of stuff we do is around fitness as well, so I'll do some fitness stuff. And then whilst in that sort of field, I run a regular football group that is sort of aimed to help people improve their physical and mental health through sport in our local area. And then what sort of makes it a little bit different is, compared to being just a standard football group, is we'll have professional footballers join every so often to sort of run a session and then do a Q&A afterwards. Well, we'll talk about mental health. And for us, we just want to sort of normalise mental health and it feel like just friends playing football and then talking about mental health after. And then through doing that, sort of setting that up, we got in there into the lovely world of football. So we'll do some mental health education to a couple of local football clubs. And then we work now doing some stuff with a couple of pro players where they'll help us, so do some outreach stuff. So there's a couple of players that will donate stuff for us to then auction off to raise some money to fund stuff. So yeah, that's what I do sort of in my day job, but my interest has always been sort of sports and mental health. And yeah, I think our first session I did with you, the first ever session, was on sort of ADHD.
Yeah, we did one on ADHD, and I think that the second one was on the mental health and sport, and we just kind of talked generally. And like, my aim has always been with all the mental health shows is trying to raise awareness, educate people, and I'd rather get one view and reach that one person who's struggling and sees like their favourite footballer, or sees, you know, as someone who they recognise, or even just me, and sees me talking about my struggles, or these people talking about their struggles, and can relate to it and doesn't feel alone, or doesn't feel as alone, or isn't like thinks if they can deal with it, I can deal with it, or goes to seek help, or, you know, whatever it may be. I'd rather have that one person than a million views. Simple as that, and that's the aim. Obviously, with this series, we're going to be talking to we've got lined up We've got former Wales international David Cottrell. We've got former Manchester United winger Keith Gillespie. We've got James Clark, who's the current captain of Walsall, and a couple of other guests to be confirmed. In this episode, we're going to be it's going to be a lot shorter, 20 minutes or so. Me and you are just going to kind of talk about our hopes for the series and whatnot, and just like an introduction, basically. But should be a couple of interesting guests there, just from those three, mate.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose so. My background before, I suppose, from running the regular football group. Obviously, when COVID happened, we had to stop running the group, and then so what we did was set up a regular weekly Skype session where each week we'd have a different footballer come on, join in and get involved in the Q&A. And I suppose that got me involved in sort of this sort of stuff where I was doing it more regularly. Before, I had no experience in doing any of this stuff. And then I remember some of the first Q&As we did were like probably very like me going, what is your favourite sporting achievement? Where now I'm a lot more relaxed. And I think then it's got us on to doing sessions where we have sort of celebrity mums who have experienced mental health difficulties, and then we do like a specific session for mums struggling with mental health. And I think when you're talking about sort of helping one person, it'd be great to get 1 million views as well. That'd be amazing.
Sure,
but,
it'd be amazing.
But I think how it works, so I would definitely agree in this, we can have two people that love football go, oh, this is great, we're just talking about mental health. But I think where it resonates more is having two sort of hosts that have got their own experiences. Yeah. So obviously my first session with Si was me talking about ADHD and how that affected me as a child, and then growing up as a young adult, not knowing anyone. And I think when we're talking about that sort of shared experience, there's a massive power in hearing someone that's been through similar experience than you and identifying with them. So my first session was on ADHD, and then I think my daughter was like probably just born,
the first session I think Mrs. was pregnant.
Yeah, and so now
the second one,
a few years down. So I had our second child, who's my son, and then sort of I noticed after the first 4 months really starting to struggle. Then so having struggles with sort of depression. My mood had gone down massively, and I think it's probably for about a year just bumbled along thinking maybe I'm just low, that's quite normal, maybe tired, it's just tired, and because we had a kid, not doing so much exercise, and it got to a point where I think I just hit sort of my sort of rock bottom, which was sort of really unwell. I went to my GP and said, look, something's not right here, I'm really struggling, and gone through like questionnaire and scored that I was struggling with depression. And then I think through that, luckily I got that help then, but I still had to go through certain things. So I remember chatting to someone recently and saying, I remember having my son, rocking him and looking in the mirror and just seeing we call it at risk of becoming sort of more of a severe mental health difficulty. And I can remember looking at the mirror and not seeing my face and seeing a not very pleasant face. And it wasn't just looking at it, was my mind sort of playing tricks on me. And then I remember just being really like, oh God, this isn't right. And then I remember my brother had visited, came for some tea, and I think my wife and my brother went out for a cigarette, and I was left with both kids, and as kids do after dinner, they were both crying, and just having my first ever panic attack. And I'd worked with for 10 years in mental health and never had a panic attack, but I'd worked with loads of people that had panic attacks and gone, I think I know what a panic attack is, I can imagine it, but until you actually have a panic attack, you have no idea what it was. And I remember that fear being probably the worst fear I've ever experienced, and like it really holding me. And I remember just having my son in my hands, just going, I have no idea what. Even now I'm thinking about it, going, and that fear of just like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Like, just rush over me. And I remember just thinking, I could have probably just gone outside, given and said, look. But at that time, you're sort of frozen in that situation. I remember just being this real fear of like, what am I doing? Are these kids safe? And real irrational fear. But I suppose that's what panic attacks do. And I said to my wife, I was lucky, I suppose at that time I could say, I just had a massive panic attack. I didn't know what to do with the kids. They were crying, and then luckily she helped me with that. But I probably had about 2 or 3 panic attacks, and then real struggle. And I think with men in particular, bonding with children is really difficult. Anyway, it takes on average 9 months to build a bond with your child. But I suppose with depression as well, it made things more difficult. So I think then for about 6 months, only now I'm sort of coming out the tail end of it, and he's about 1.5 years, and I've had to do a lot of stuff, like we've done some counselling. And I think for me, where it really started, I noticed my mood change for the better was probably doing exercise. So I had to, my daughter needs being picked up from school, and I probably got, not lazy, but with that depression, I got real low, and I couldn't even think about cycling. But I sort of had to go, right, one day at a time. I have to make if I say I'm going to pick her up, someone's going to have to pick her up. So I picked her up on my bike, and then getting used to cycling. So every week, and then lockdown happened. But just sort of end of July, when things started opening back up, we set up like a dad's football group just for me to do my personal stuff. And luckily, with lockdown and all the restrictions, it hasn't affected football, outdoor football. So I've been doing that, and I've noticed then, that's when I noticed everything really getting that exercise, as well as taking sort of antidepressants, and doing other stuff, collective approach really improved my mood. So I think when we first talked about doing these sessions, I said, it's really important to hear those experiences from the footballers, but I think that they're coming from a good place and experience that people, it's not just us going, oh yeah, that we're not just trying to get a juicy story or trying to get something out of it. We've seen our own struggles personally or in family members that we want to get something out so we can help more people. And I think for me, I spoke to another guest a couple of weeks ago, and I said, only now I can say, if it wasn't for my lived experience or struggles with depression, struggles with ADHD, I wouldn't be where I am now, and that's a really happy place. But it takes those difficult, really dark moments, and those dark moments where I was, very dark, and I didn't feel like I could go to, some people go, oh, go to your family member, go to your partner, and I probably did. I definitely didn't go to them at those dark moments. And I'm lucky I had a close friend that worked in this field that I could go to and help me out. But I think it coming from a good place will make hopefully it more of a genuine podcast of two people that have been there, got the experience, and they're aiming to help people. So when we first spoke about doing this, I was definitely keen. And I hopefully when, like we were saying at the beginning, when people listen to it, our sort of lived experience will come out when you're listening, and the people that are listening to either get something from it and realize actually, because there might be someone listening to this that is at that stage that I was a year ago, really struggling, and hopefully it could help them. Or it could just be people that really want to learn more about mental health, that maybe young coaches or young players that go, there's not enough support out there for young players or coaches in mental health. So unfortunately, they're having to learn their own way. So it could be just listen to this, or hopefully it could be, maybe a player. There's a lot of players out there struggling because they're not comfortable to come out and speak about their mental health. So maybe hearing other pros talk about it might help them as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a good point you make at the end there about football coaches, clubs, players, whether it's about themselves or their employees or teammates, is like, I know from listening to or speaking to David Cottrell previously, like one of the things which was an issue for him was the lack of support at the time. And I think that's something which football clubs now can take a big kind of look at, is like, if you know that there's a player who's drinking but he's performing on the pitch, for instance, don't ignore the drinking just because he's still doing his job well. Let's try and help these guys, whether they're young or coming to the end of their career or whatever it may be. We know a lot more about mental health now than we did 10 years ago, so let's use that fact.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's more like, I'm a big football fan, but I think I'm more, I have a team I support, but I think I'm more of now grown up with my experiences, more fans of players. So there's a couple of players that I know or we've worked with in the past, so I'll follow them and their teams and hope they score and stuff like that. But I think for some fans, knowing that actually your actions as a fan can have a reaction. So, there's players that will experience horrendous amount of abuse and death threats and stuff like that, and stuff to their houses, and realise actually they're doing a job. They are doing this job. You get a lot when players go from one club to another, and it could be a rival club, for example, and think, is that rival club paying them a lot more? Would you, if someone offered you a pay rise or double your pay, would you be willing to move that? And also understanding if your hometown, you play for your hometown team and then they release you, and there's one other club in your city that ain't going to have you because you play for their rival, you might then have to move your family, an hour down the road, and I think people just don't understand that as fans. You see this glamorous world of football and you think, oh, it's amazing, I'd love to be involved in it. And when you actually pull that curtain back, you realise actually
there's a lot of pressure.
There's so much pressure, and there's a lot of just basic stuff that I don't think clubs are doing. We've spoken to players that in the past that have gone through, divorces, and in any other job you'd hope that the manager would go, you're going through a really difficult time at the moment. Let's have a look at have a couple of days, or let's have a look at your workload. In football, it's not that. I'm paying you to do this, so you do it. If you can't do that, you're on with the reserves. And I think that brutalness, hopefully, is changing. You're noticing it with coaching styles. I suppose the younger coaches it's not in. You don't see it as much, but it's definitely still there. I suppose in the board level of management of like sort of owners, that older sort of traditionally,
isn't it?
Yeah, that sort of privileged white older male is running most clubs in this country, and their views on mental health, whatever they might say for social
probably
media,
the same as everyone else's were 10, 15 years ago.
It's nice to hear all these things, but we want to start seeing those changes in how actually clubs run.
Yeah, 100%. Just going back to what you were saying about like your own sort of issues over the past year and stuff. Like I've been quite open since I started the podcast, about 18 months, probably nearly 2 years now. Like I did a show with football journalist Phil Brown where we talked about grief. We talked about how we both hadn't dealt with grief when we were younger, and that led to kind of issues with depression and addiction. In his case, it was painkillers. In my case, it was drinking. And like I hate social media. If I didn't have a podcast, I think I'd be off it by now. However, I do use my personal Facebook page as like a kind of therapeutic thing, whereby my personal Facebook page, if you go to it, is private. But if you're friends with me on Facebook, you'll see like it is just me saying how I'm feeling, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, because it helps me just to get it out of my head and on paper, what would have been a year when I was younger on paper, but it's just a different way of doing it. So like obviously we're going to be telling the stories of these footballers and their experiences, but we have our own experiences in different forms of mental illness or mental health or addiction and whatever it may be. So it'll be interesting, and like I mentioned at the start in the intro, that one of the things I want to do is educate people, because whilst yes, it's great that people's opinion of mental health is changing, it's still not where I want it to be, where it should be. And I do think there's a lot of, not just in sport, in football, in general, a lot of kind of lip service where people say, oh yeah, let's be more aware of mental health, let's be more kinder, and then that same person 5 minutes later is tweeting abuse at their favourite celebrity or least favourite celebrity, or footballer or whatever it may be. And we'll delve into that a little bit. We'll delve into things like social media and media generally with these players. One thing I was going to touch on, when obviously we've had Keith Gillespie and David Cottrell on the Andy Campbell Show, which is our live Monday football show. And obviously in those shows we talked specifically about their football career and everything in between. This is going to be basically their story of how their addictions or their mental health has kind of formed, developed, and then been dealt with, and then the aftermath of it along the way. And it's going to be quite emotive, it's going to be quite personal.
And we hope it's not. Some people have said to me about any sort of podcast, I won't listen to that one because I'm not, Cardiff fan or stuff like that.
Yeah.
We want this to feel like it doesn't matter if you like football or not. It's a group of people talking about mental health openly, where there's no shame, no guilt, where hopefully people can just go, this is me. These are what I've struggled with. Hopefully you might get something out of this. And hopefully the good thing about mental health, it's great talking about it, but also there is some amazing moments with experiences. There's moments of sheer grief and loss and stuff like that. But with mental health, there's some crazy things that happen. Like there's some real funny bits.
I guarantee there's some funny bits. Like
obviously
we've already recorded one episode, should we say? And even in that, there was a couple of moments where you have a little chuckle about incidents or things happening. So it's not kind of going to be like this dark, like woe is me, and we're all going to be kind of like, oh, everything's like so hard done by. It's not about that. It's about not just educating people, but it's about telling these guys' story when they've had difficulties and they've had addictions or mental health problems, and looking back on it. Why did they start? How did they start? Could someone have intervened early on and steer them on a different path? How did they eventually get to rock bottom? What was their rock bottom? Who helped them? Who did they hurt along the way? Who was the one that finally was able to get through to them? How many people tried to get through to them? There's so many aspects to this side of this story, and I just think it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be fascinating to talk to these guys and hear their stories. And
definitely.
It's just going to be a very interesting series.
It's going to be amazing.
It is. I'm really looking forward to, just seeing people's reaction to it, and also just hearing these guys talk about their issues, because even, like I said, going back about lip services, so many people say about mental health and stuff on social media, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about it when it gets awkward. Let's talk about it when we feel uncomfortable. Because
those are the best conversations, aren't they? Those are the best conversations. I always think with sort of podcasts or anything, you want, I suppose, as a host, you want people to feel like they're a little fly on the wall listening to this really deep
listening to a conversation.
Or crazy, difficult conversation. And you want, the best podcasts I listen to are the ones where I feel like I'm involved in this real private thing, or I'm getting something out of it, like a bit of comedy and stuff like that. And the difficult thing with I suppose, addiction and mental health is when we are struggling and in those deep moments, there's things we do when we come back out of it and go, what the hell was I thinking? Where did that come from? Where,
what on earth was I doing?
What was those difficult situations and questions?
I used to strip naked in the pub. I used to do that quite often.
And that was before you were struggling, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was just for fun. I just used to do that for a laugh. Occasionally, I still do. No,
I'm saying if you could, all my 10 years working in the NHS on wards and in community, if you could write a sitcom about some of the stuff, even most of it's just the staff stuff. But yeah, it'd be great. So hopefully we're going to tease some great stories out of each guest.
Absolutely, you should get Gervais to write that. I think he could do a fantastic job of writing that.
Yeah.
And I'll just finish off this little introduction episode just by saying, if you are, or you've got a family member or a friend who is battling addiction or is struggling with mental health issues, just know you're not alone. Know that we're all in it together, and you can get through it. As a good friend of mine says, keep on keeping on. I will drop links in the description to our social medias and stuff like that, and also the Mind mental health charity as well. And also subscribe to the YouTube channel, because that helps us lots as we continue to try and grow. We'll be back next Sunday for episode number 1 of A.C.E Podcast Nation's Mental Health in Sport Series 2. Jacob, thank you very much, mate.
Cheers for having you. See you next week.
I don't know, actually. It's a bit of a strange one. I think as I've got older, and I think as I mature or grow, I think I'd learn to accept things and accept sort of the issues I have or have had. And I think sort of the world we live in now, it's more acceptable to sort of have the conversation. And I think over the years, don't get me wrong, I've learned the hard way of being able to talk about my experiences, but I've seen probably other people talking about it.
Probably from an early age, I was always searching for perfection. The real problem for me came when, you could get a bet on just over the phone, ringing up, and that side of things, changing, where you didn't have to, physically go into bookies to get a bet on. Other people are saying, you're always happy and friendly when you're around me. It's kind of like, well, okay then, because I was happy and friendly, you didn't mean that I was going home and I live with you, by the way, on a 24-hour basis. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, you knew what you were going to get from Gary Speed. He was 100% and a fantastic player. But certainly, I remember when I heard the news. I was in Manchester at the time, and it was just one of them that you just, for days, weeks, months, years even afterwards, you sort of still think to yourself, did that really happen? Just before that, when I was 13, 14, I knew I had anger problems, where I was always I would self-harm, where I'd smash my studs against my shins, because I thought, well, I could always cover that up. The gambling then, as I say, because of my circumstances and a new city, and just the gambling became more and more. And then when I got my first, where I could ring up and put a bet on, back in October '95, I lost 47,000 in one afternoon, and then the following day I lost another 15,000. So sort of 62,000 in 2 days, and we're talking, it's a lot of money, but back then it's even more, because we're talking 25 years ago.
Explain to me, because like you say, PTSD we normally relate to sort of war, and because that's how we've sort of seen it, and I felt like I was doing PTSD a disservice by relating it to my experience, if that makes sense. I was a bit people have got it, they've been to war, and I was I had an allergic reaction on the pitch. I was you can't really relate the two. So I felt like I was discrediting the term PTSD.